So yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm really excited to talk about, well, I thought really long and hard, what should I talk about? Because a topic like AI, especially right now, it's like one could talk for a month on this. So to try and fit it into like an hour, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing around AI for the last few years. And the title of my talk is Distributed Consciousness, which is the title of a project that I did a few years ago. And I'm mostly going to be talking about that project. But before I do, I'd like to give you a couple of minutes, an overview of the work that I've been doing with or without AI. So just a few minutes covering all the themes that I've kind of been interested in. So I had this realization a few years ago, back in 2015, that all of my work was about waves or God, and that somehow, or luckily, quantum mechanics unified the two. And looking back, I now realize that with the term waves, I was actually referring to the patterns in nature which we humans have collectively managed to recognize, decipher, and formalize into equations and theories. Sometimes I would even find elegant or beautiful. And by the term God, I think I was referring to those mysterious aspects of nature which we have yet to understand, and the lengths that we go to, the stories we invent to try and make sense of it all. And with the term quantum mechanics, I think I was referring to the fringes of human knowledge which we empirically know to be accurate and can understand through the language of mathematics, but we're not yet able to fully comprehend on a deeper level. So this is the space that I find myself oscillating in, if you pardon the pun, exploring the tensions between technology, ecology, science, and spirituality. My work comes in different forms. I create interactive works, I create installations, immersive installations. Primarily, I write code. That's my medium, that's my craft. So I create outdoor installations, indoor installations. I work with lights and lasers. Real-time control is a very important part of my work, and that's what I did my PhD in, particularly with AI, how to control systems in real time with meaningful human control. And that's where I got interested in AI, which I will talk about shortly. So I work a lot with emerging technologies as both a medium and as a subject matter. I think of these technologies as extensions of our body, as extensions of our mind, and I think about their impact on us as individuals, how we behave and how we express ourselves, and ultimately their impact on society, culture, ethics, law, tradition, and ritual and religion. I do think about ritual and religion a lot, and I don't just mean the established traditional rituals, religions, or forms of spirituality, but the new forms with their current evolved incarnations. New rituals, new spiritual frameworks, new forms and places of worship, and the values that are enmeshed with these practices and technologies that we're creating. And I think of rituals as algorithms for the body and mind. And that brings me to the final theme of this section, which is the mind, human mind, non-human minds, biological minds, and synthetic minds. I'm really interested in these technologies and the politics of the technologies and how AI has actually manifested itself as a technology and product in our lives today. But I'm equally fascinated by the more speculative metaphysics of AI as reflections on ourselves, as reflections on how we perceive the world and how we make meaning, and as a computational lens on trying to understand ourselves, the nature of the mind, and perhaps even consciousness. And this last point really is what I'm going to be spending most of this next hour or so talking about. So I've been working in AI for many years, and somehow for the last 10 years, every year when I thought the AI hype could not get worse, it somehow manages to get even worse. So this is what Google thinks AI looks like. It's very blue and shiny. But I want to go back in time a bit back to 2015, July 2015, to this particular algorithm called Deep Dream. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but the internet was on fire with this kind of imagery back in the day. I know everyone hates Deep Dream. I really love it, but it's not the aesthetics that I love. I really love the poetry of what's happening inside this algorithm. To really quickly go over it, this is an artificial neural network that's been trained to recognize and classify images. And then it's presented an image that it doesn't recognize, such as my face. And this so-called Deep Dream algorithm runs this neural network backwards instead of forwards. And it basically tries to modify the image in such a way as to amplify certain neural activations in the depths of the neural network. And this is very loosely analogous to you looking at a cloud, thinking you see a rabbit, and then drawing the rabbits that you think you see, and then looking at what you just drew, and then redrawing what you think you saw. So it's like a recursive feedback loop of basically bias. This in itself is interesting, but what I find more interesting is that when we look at these images and we say, oh, look, there's a bird lizard, there's a puppy slug. Actually, there's no such thing as a puppy slug or a bird lizard. What's happening is we're seeing just noise with a particular distribution, and the neural network saw bird-like, lizard-like textures and amplified those. And then our own brains, see those same textures and patterns and amplifies those in our minds, and we project back what we think we see onto these images. So we complete that loop of meaning making. And so in my mind, this is a duet between a biological and an artificial neural network trying to make meaning out of the world based on what they already know. And this is what a lot of my earlier work around AI has been exploring, using machines that learn to reflect on how we make sense of the world, and using machine bias to reflect on our own self-affirming cognitive biases. Because you can put this into an artificial neural network, pure random white noise, and it goes on a long journey through multiple dimensions and transformations in space and time, because that is literally what a deep artificial neural network is. And it produces this. It's a more structured noise with a more particular distribution, such that we can then project meaning onto, because that's who we are, that's what we do, that's what we've always done. We look for patterns and we find them and we project what we know onto them. It's how we deal with uncertainty, it's how we connect with each other. We invent rituals, algorithms for the body and mind that transform our mental and emotional states to otherwise unattainable modes of being. We see things not as they are, but as we are. Everything that you see or read or hear, even these sentences that I'm saying right now, you're trying to make sense of by relating to your own past experiences, filtered by your prior beliefs and knowledge. And actually, I have no idea what any of what I'm saying means to any of you. It's impossible for me to see the world through your eyes, to feel what you, without having read everything you've ever read and felt everything you've ever felt and lived everything you've ever lived. And this makes empathy and compassion much harder than we might think, and makes them all the more valuable and crucial. So what you're seeing right now is from a series of work called Learning to See. It's an artificial neural network that's running real time on a live camera input. And there's a few themes behind this work. On a practical level, it's exploring expressive human-machine interaction, investigating deep learning to develop systems that augment human creative expression, specifically generative systems that we can use in a real-time, expressive manner with meaningful human control. And this is kind of what my PhD was on. But there are higher-level motivations. This is a network that has seen nothing but thousands of images of waves or flowers. And now it looks at the world, it looks at my desk, my hands, and it tries to make sense of what it's seeing in context of what it's seen before. But it can see only through the filter of what it already knows, just like us, because we too see things not as they are, but as we are. So this work exists as a number of videos, like the one I showed, also as an installation. There's a plinth with a bunch of junk on it, some broken cables, some rags, some everyday household stuff. And you can spend a few seconds just rearranging these objects. Or if you're like me, you can spend hours trying to sculpt your perfect bouquet or meticulously shaping your perfect wave. I trained a number of models for this, which were inspired by the classic elements of nature. Flowers represents earth. The ocean is water, of course. There's fire, and clouds represents air or wind. And then the fifth element is beyond our planet, the ether, the void, the cosmos, the home of God. And this was trained on thousands of images from the Hubble Space Telescope.
This is a world of wonders.
I'd like to distill this theme a bit and talk about a particular project called Fight, which actually doesn't use AI at all. It's not an AI piece. It's more about perception, human cognition and human perception, but it was very inspired by my work in AI. And so it's thematically very linked to the previous work, and they're both from the same year, 2017. This is a VR piece, but it's actually about as a virtual reality, but it's actually about as non-virtual reality as a work can get, actually, and I'll explain shortly why. So our eyes are often likened to cameras, as if light falls on the retina, forms an image, and then that image gets sent to the brain for processing. But that's not how seeing works at all. In the days of the ancient Greeks, it was believed that we shot rays out of our eyes, and those rays would hit objects, and that's how we could see. Even people such as Plato believed in this kind of theory and said that the eye contained such a fire that has the property not of burning, but of yielding a gentle light. And when it strikes upon any object it encounters outside, it passes on the motions of anything it comes in contact with throughout the whole body to the soul. And this is what caused the sensation of seeing. So many great thinkers for many centuries elaborated on this, what was known as the extramission theory of vision. I think it's a very beautiful theory. Of course, they were wrong. Even back then, many, many centuries before Newton, the Islamic scholar, mathematician, astronomer, Ibn al-Haytham, and many others were already postulating an intromission theory of vision, that our eyes didn't emit light, but rather light or other kind of particles would bounce off objects and it would enter our eyes, and that's how we would see, which is the correct theory, of course. However, I still really like the extramission theory because it underlines a really crucial aspect of vision that we sometimes forget, and that is seeing is an active process. Perception is an active process. A lot of processing happens within the eye itself. The only part of the retina which is actually full color and really high resolution is the fovea, which is about 2 degrees. And if I held my arm out at full length, it would only see about 2 thumbnails across. So that's the part that's actually full resolution, full color. The rest is all very low resolution and mostly black and white. But my conscious experience of vision is this very high fidelity, greater than 180 degrees image, as if there's someone sitting inside my head looking through this giant window out into the world. But of course, that's an illusion. Several times a second, my brain is sending signals to my eye muscles and my head to make these quick movements known as saccades. And my eye is constantly fixating on salient features in the scene. And then the brain is integrating those signals along with the movements that my head and my neck and my eyes are making, along with everything that it already thinks it knows about the scene and everything that it's expecting to see. And then my mind constructs this mental image that I see in my conscious awareness, of this giant panoramic full-color, full-resolution image. And we know a lot of this thanks to the Russian scientist Alfred Yarbus in the research he did in the 50s and 60s using eye tracking, using what looks like this torture device. And he found really fascinating results, such as the meaning that we try to extract from a scene or from the world affects the ways that our eyes move. It affects the actions that we take. He, for example, he showed people this painting, An Unexpected Visitor by Ilya Repin, and he asked questions such as, how old are the people in this painting? What are they talking about? How long has this visitor been away? And this changes the way people scan this scene. In other words, it changes the unconscious actions that people take in the world, depending on the kind of questions that they're looking to answer. So our eyes are continually unconsciously scanning the world, and most of this information doesn't make it to our conscious awareness. Instead, the information is processed, integrated to build a single coherent model of the world. There are structural similarities between the eye and a camera. Obviously, there's a lens that can focus, there's an aperture to adjust the amount of light that comes in, etc. But the act of seeing is not like a camera at all. The philosopher Al-Vanoui likens seeing with the eye more like how a visually impaired person might see the world through touch, because it is actually a lot more analogous in terms of scanning the world, fixating and integrating the movements along with your expectations and the signals that you're getting. So the final thing I'd like to talk about before I talk about the actual project is a thing called binocular rivalry, which is a phenomenon that's been known for many centuries, but artistically it hasn't been explored as much as I thought it should be. So first I'll talk about what it is. So under normal circumstances, our two eyes would be receiving information about the same 3D world, just from slightly different perspectives, and the brain uses that information along with some other cues to construct a 3D percept. So I have this model of this 3D world in front of me that has depth information, and that's constructed from the two eyes as well as parallax and some other stuff. However, if the two eyes are presented radically different images, known as dissimilar monocular images, then your brain cannot integrate these into a single cohesive 3D percept. These images become rivals. In your conscious mind, you won't see both images. Instead, what will happen is these two images will fight for conscious awareness. And this fight or rivalry happens apparently all the way through the whole neural chain, from the eyes all the way to your conscious awareness. And what you see in your mind's eye, as real as I'm seeing you right now, and as real as you are seeing me right now, is that they will alternate. And they won't necessarily they might flicker, they might transition across, etc. For example, if the left eye is given red and black vertical images, and the right eye is given blue and black horizontal image, you will see something that resembles what's on the right, this weird mixed percept. And you will see this as real as you see me right now. But what's weirder is it won't be static. It will be moving, it will be morphing, it will be flicking between. It will move in animated swirls and masks, or it might even flicker. But the key thing is, what happens, what you see, depends on your physiology. It's entirely dependent on you. It is impossible for me to know what you will see. If I present these two stimulus to you, what will you see in your mind, in your conscious awareness? It's impossible for me to know. Even though I give everybody the exact same stimulus, everybody will see something different. Now, of course, this is how it always is. This is how it is every time we see something. This is how it is when we read a piece of text. This is how it is when we read a book. but we forget that. So the purpose of this project was to try and remind us that this is how perception and cognition works. So to very quickly summarize, what we perceive to be real, what we see is a reconstruction in our minds, a simplified model of the world inspired, limited by our biology and physiology. And I glossed over a lot very quickly. I mean, I could talk an hour about just this one point, but I'll just move on for now. Perception, including vision, is an active process. It requires action and integration. The actions that we take affects the reality and the meaning that we construct in our mind. And most importantly, even when presented with identical information, the same images, everybody will experience, they will see something unique and personal, which nobody else can see or even understand. And I'm interested in these ideas at a low level regarding our senses and perception, particularly visual perception, but also conceptually at a higher level regarding how we make and interpret meaning, and as a result, what we consider to be truth and how we interact with each other as a result of this, and the downstream effects on society and culture and politics. So I was developing this in 2016. I was living in England at the time, which was being torn apart over Brexit. And I'm from Turkey, which obviously has been torn apart for quite some time now over Erdogan. And obviously the US has been having some troubles as well, I hear, politically. So really this project was a response. In fact, a lot of my work around that time was a response to the increasing social and political polarization that's been happening. So this work was born. As I said, it's a VR experience. That's got nothing to do with VR. I simply use the VR headset, the VR technology, as a mechanism to deploy radically different images to both eyes. It's a 10-minute linear abstract film, immersive abstract film, that uses binocular rivalry. And this is what the installation looks like. The environment is very important because I wanted it so that when you walk into the room, you immediately know something's going to happen. I wanted it to feel very kind of homely, comfortable, welcoming, with a slight oddness to it, alluding to the fact that you are perhaps about to go on some kind of a spiritual but bizarre journey. The internal experience is so unfamiliar. It's not nauseating like VR can be. It's just so unfamiliar that I thought it was essential to have like a giant armchair to anchor you. It almost feels like you're being hugged, because you do lose complete sense of reality when you're presented with this, and it's filling your full vision. That being able to just sink into an armchair was a really, really important part of the work. And I had to fight with a lot of curators who didn't want to find an armchair to put in, but yeah, it's a really important part of it. So I will show some excerpts. So this here, for example, this is about halfway through. You can look around, it's VR. At this point, there's no rivalry. So rivalry comes and goes. I play with the rivalry to come and go. And let me just pause it for a second. When there's no rivalry, it's rendered like VR, so from different perspectives. So it feels like you're inside a room. It feels like a real room. It feels like an abstract room. If I just rewind a bit. But this wall feels like it is, 5 meters in front of you, in the same way that this wall feels outside of me. Also, there's an interactivity such that wherever you look, it deforms, which was trying to kind of underline the idea that seeing is an active process. It's not passive. The act of seeing is affecting the meaning that you take. Where you look affects the reality that's constructed in your mind. So that was why wherever you look kind of deforms. But as rivalry comes in, what happens is the brain starts having a harder time integrating into signals, and at one point it loses it. And when it loses it, the image ceases to be situated external to your body, but it feels like it's inside your head. So you see the image, but you see it inside your head. Which is very different to looking at the world with one eye, because even with one eye, when I look at you, still feel external to me because I have prides based on your size and the fact that you are humans. But when you see things like this, the image appears inside your head, which is how seeing always is. But again, we forget that. This was another kind of moment. It kind of looks a bit better on the TV screens because it's a bit washed out in the projection. But this is wherever you look, you're constructing. So this is quite a literal interpretation of the idea that wherever you look, you're constructing stuff with your eyeballs. And the rivalry, it's really fascinating. I did a lot of experiments. There's different kinds of rivalry you can do. So here, on the main big objects, there is no structural rivalry. They're the same. So the big objects you see as 3D objects external to you. But the stuff that's floating around, they don't correspond left and right. So there is rivalry. So they appear inside your head. Also, the colors are different. And when the colors are different, if the hue is close enough, the brain mixes the hue, and you would see it as a solid color. But if the hue is wide enough, the hue differences, then you get rivalry, but just on the color. So the shape appears in your head. So the shape appears like a solid object, but it's got a weird shimmering. So this was fights.
I like to think of a cybernetic network where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony, like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think right now of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics, where ideas draw peacefully past computers as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. I like to think of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature. Return to our mammal brothers and sisters. And all watched over by machines of loving grace.
So you might have seen that at the Mandeville Art Gallery, where there's an exhibition right now of like new visual arts faculty. I made that in 2021. It was a kind of continuation of the Deep Dream video that I showed at the beginning. The Deep Dream was 2015. And kind of technically, conceptually, what was happening in that video was very similar, technically, I mean. It was just blowing my mind that in 6 years, we had done that much progress from Deep Dream to that. And that, in 2021, I made that. That was one of the first works that was done via prompting, as you might be familiar from previous lectures. I was using a text-to-image model. But this is before Midjourney, before DALL-E, before any of that stuff. And I was kind of blown away that by 2021, we could just, via prompting, I could create that. And now, in the last 2 years, yeah, I'm going to talk about that at the very end. In between, I want to talk about distributed consciousness, which is the work that gives its title to this presentation. So this is a very multifaceted project that spans themes of biological and artificial intelligence, distributed computation, distributed cognition, cryptography, evolution, phenomenology, ecological awareness, climate change, activism, and cephalopods. So I'll first talk about what the project is and how it manifested itself, and then I'll talk about some of the themes and motivations behind the work. It began as an NFT collection on the ecologically friendly Tezos blockchain. These are all AI-generated images that I created using custom software, using the prompting techniques. This was all, again, in kind of early 2021. There's 256 of them, because that's 2 to the power of 8, and octopuses have 8 legs, of course. And in October 2021, I released them into the world, and they were kind of minted, collection of 256. And then a month after I released them all, I announced that there was actually a secret, that this was just phase 1, and there was a phase 2. And then I revealed what phase 2 was. And phase 2 was that each of the images of these octopuses that had been spawned, that had been minted on the blockchain, and they'd been sold and people had bought them, they actually had some text cryptographically encoded into the pixels, which are invisible to the human eye, but can be read through code. And this text was basically verses. I thought of them as verses. So every image was actually a little verse from a much larger poem, or a page from a much larger manifesto. And the entire collection was actually a manifesto. And this text was generated with AI as well. This is before ChatGPT, but GPT-3 was state of the art at the time. So I used GPT-3 to write a manifesto. It was a kind of co-creation. It was a 2-hour long manifesto, if you were to read the whole thing. Meditation spanning themes of consciousness, free will, life, death, art, technology, ritual, ecology, economy, and sustainability. And then I released each of these verses also as an NFT, as a separate collection, as an audiovisual reading, so to accompany each image. The whole thing, if you were to go through the whole thing, it's about 2 hours long. I edited it down later to 22 minutes to make an installation version, and I'm going to show the installation version later, and I'll play some excerpts so you get an idea of what the manifesto looks or sounds like. But first I'll talk about the motivations, and there's a few different threads that will start separate, and I'm going to try and thread them together. So I made this during the pandemic. I had been stranded because my visa had been put on frozen, and I was stuck in Turkey in a small Mediterranean fishing village. And I'd go snorkeling all the time there, and I would see octopuses very often. But usually they'd be at depths like 3, 4, 5 meters. And at that depth, the water filters out a lot of the wavelengths of light. So that's why everything looks bluish green. So I see all these octopuses, they're always bluish green. I'm like, okay, cool. But one day I saw an octopus on a rock at the surface, and it flashed at me the most intense colors. And it just completely blew my mind, the vividness of the pink, purple, yellow, orange, cyan. It really completely blew my mind. And that was the spark that ignited the mess of highly flammable, loose ideas that were floating around in my head, but had not yet collated. So that was the spark. And in fact, I tweeted it when that happened. Well, actually, after I released the project. 2, distributed computation. So also 2021, this was the year of the blockchain, as you might remember. This was the big explosion of NFTs and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot to be said about the so-called Web3 phenomena and the hype, whether it's to do with the VC-backed hyper-capitalist, extreme libertarian values that were driving its growth, or the ecological nightmare, proof of work that was driving coins like Bitcoin or Ethereum at the time before it switched. But the thread that I want to weave in related to blockchains and this project is a more speculative one. So I've been in AI for many years, and The term has really exploded in popularity relatively recently. This is the graph for the trend term AI. And if you look, it's around 2015 that it kind of really starts exploding. And I find it fascinating that when you look at the trend graph for the term big data, if you remember, big data used to be the buzzword back in the day. And that kind of exploded around 2010. We had a steady period of big data. And I'm really fascinated by how first we had big data, and then after a period of big data, we have an explosion of AI. Now, this in itself, I have a 1-hour lecture on this very phenomena, so I'm going to try and summarize it. But one aspect of this that I find fascinating is the provocation that consciousness is evolution's solution to dealing with big data in the natural world. Especially when vision evolved around 500 million years ago, it brought with it selective pressures to reward organisms that could utilize the limited bandwidth in their neural pathways to more efficiently evade predators or find prey. And ultimately, some believe this may have even contributed to the evolutionary arms race that we call the Cambrian explosion. And as organisms became more complex, some of them started learning to model the environment so that they could be more efficient and successful in processing the information and all the complex sensory information, so they could be more optimal and, dare I say, take more intelligent actions in an increasingly complex world. And then going even further, to further improve chances of survival, some organisms may learn to model themselves as abstract entities with goals and needs and desires in an environment full of other abstract entities with goals and needs and desires. So I can interact with any of you and try to predict or understand your actions, not by simulating the activity of trillions of cells, or by trying to solve the wave function of your oscillations in quantum cosmic fields, but instead as high-level abstract entities that think and feel, whereby your consciousness is my abstracted, my abstraction to you. It's my interface to you, and I can empathize with your needs and desires, and that's how I can connect with you. So I like this metaphor relating the emergence of AI as a means of coping with big data, analogous to the Darwinian evolution of intelligence and perhaps even consciousness as a means of dealing with big data in biology. And I wrote about this in 2014, almost 8 years ago. In 2016, Peter Godfrey Smith wrote a wonderful book called Other Minds that's exactly on this topic, and I will get to that shortly as well. But bringing it back to this thread, as I said, there's many aspects of blockchains that is worth being critical about and thinking about and pulling apart and reflecting upon. The thread that weaves into this narrative is I do find the idea of distributed world computers really fascinating. And these are the specific blockchains, not necessarily like Bitcoin, but more like Ethereum or Tezos, which allow the execution of arbitrary code in a distributed manner, where every node in the network has a full copy of all of the code and all of the data. And every node can run fully autonomously if need be. But they also coordinate and cooperate and distribute workloads if need be as well. And they reach consensus with other nodes. And I find this fascinating as a metaphor relating to the rise of multicellular organisms in biology, where every cell in the body is itself an autonomous machine containing a full copy of the genetic code, and a body is a distributed network of such cells where the cells have divided the workload and they reach consensus in a very distributed and decentralized manner. 3, distributed intelligence. More than 500 million years ago, the lineage that would lead to octopuses and the one leading to humans separated. Was it possible, I wondered, to reach another mind on the other side of that divide? Octopuses represent the great mystery of the other. Cy Montgomery, The Soul of an Octopus, 2016. So octopuses are known to be very intelligent. They have a radically different kind of intelligence and biology to humans, or even mammals or birds or anything that we're familiar with. The nervous system of a common octopus has around 500 million neurons, similar to that of a dog's cortex. But unlike any dog or any mammal, reptile, bird, or amphibian, these 500 million neurons are not concentrated in a central location like a brain, but they're distributed across the entire body of the octopus, with only 10% in a central brain and 2/3 in the arms. In fact, with more than 40 million neurons in each arm, almost double that of a rat's cortex, each arm is able to act independently, even communicating directly with the other arms without informing the central brain. Each arm is semi-autonomous, able to move, touch, taste, smell, and respond, even if severed from the body. With each arm having a mind of its own, the octopus has a distributed intelligence, a very different kind of intelligence to the ones that we're accustomed to. To paraphrase the philosopher Thomas Nagel, what is it like to be an octopus? Or in fact, what is it like to be an octopus's arm? Cephalopods are an independent experiment in the evolution of large brains and complex behavior. If we can make contact with cephalopods as sentient beings, it is not because of a shared history, not because of a kinship, but because evolution built minds twice over. This is probably the closest we will come to meeting an intelligent alien. If we want to understand other minds, the minds of cephalopods are the most other of all. Peter Godfrey Smith, Other Minds, 2016. 4, quote-unquote artificial intelligence. So back to this graph, there's the term artificial intelligence, and if you remember, it started exploding in 2015. So in 2015, AI exploded into the mainstream. And then, interestingly, in 2016, we had not one, not two, but 3 books, mainstream books, released on octopuses or cephalopods. Soul of an Octopus by Simon Montgomery, Donna Haraway Staying with the Trouble, and finally Other Minds by Peter Godfrey Smith. These are all really wonderful books in very different ways, and of course none of these books are really about cephalopods. Instead, these books invite us to reflect on the nature of our relationship with non-human intelligences and consciousnesses that we share our planet with. They invite us to face the final Copernican trauma that is waiting ahead of us. Centuries ago, we had discovered what was exhilarating for some, but too painful for many others to accept, that we are not the only planet in existence. We eventually realized that we are not the only solar system, we are not the only galaxy, and many of our smartest today are questioning whether we are even the only universe in existence. Every one of these discoveries brought with it a realization that was exciting, liberating, and humbling for some, but too painful for others to accept. A decentering of human exceptionalism, a Copernican turn that pressured humanity into revisiting our perceptions on how we relate to the world, the cosmos, and its human and non-human living and non-living inhabitants. 5, distributed consciousness. With the rise of a quote-unquote artificial intelligence, we are now facing these age-old questions that we have pondered over for thousands of years through this new lens of computation. And cephalopods, with their incredibly advanced yet utterly intelligence, represent a great example of an already existing non-human, seemingly alien, decentralized other mind. And now we face this ultimate Copernican trauma, the final decentering of human exceptionalism, where this time the arena of realization is not situated outside of us, but within. It is not regarding where we are in relation to the world, but who we are. We are now faced with the reality that we may not be the sole keepers of what we might consider to be intelligence, creativity, or even consciousness. We are all connected to each other biologically, to the Earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically. Neil deGrasse Tyson. So this is the installation version. This was in last year in Shenzhen, China. It's a 9-meter wide diameter installation with a bunch of LED screens. So that's, I think, about 30 feet, 25 feet. 2.5 meter LED screens, stuff like that. So I'm going to now play some excerpts from rendered visualizations of the installation of Excerpts. It's going to be about 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization.
5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualization. 5 minutes, I think, of the visualiz
Your consciousness is not confined to your body, but extends infinitely in all directions. You are not a separate being from the rest of the universe, but an integral part of it. There is no such thing as a separate body. You are merely an accumulation of energy fields, flowing particles and vibrating strings. You are not a thing, but an interconnected web of things. I argue for a drawing of the body that includes all beings, humans, plants, animals, and bacteria. This also means thinking about the being of being. It means acknowledging that everything that is comes into being through both our bodies and not only ours. Whenever you see the hundreds and hundreds of stars in the sky, remember. Whenever you hear the sound of your own heart beating inside your chest, remember. Whenever you kiss the lips of one who truly loves you, remember. Whenever you feel the thunderbolt of passion pounding in your breast, remember. Whenever you hear the voice of one who speaks to your soul, remember. Remember, this your true nature. In its bright light, you will see there is no one here but yourself. The atoms in your body were once inside a supernova, and they will be inside new star systems millions of years from now. You cannot leave the world, for you are not in the world. The world is not out there. The world is within you, physically and mentally. The world as you experience it through your senses is not an accurate rendition of the world, but a subjective representation of reality, a hallucination filtered and constructed by your brain. This hallucination and the way that your brain constructs it is optimized for survival in a very specific environment, the African savanna, tens of thousands of years ago. It is not optimized for the modern human living in a modern environment. Since the environment has changed so much, your brain isn't always very useful anymore. It's like a Stone Age tool in the modern world. And this makes your brain very susceptible to manipulation, exploitation, and hacking. Especially now, at a time where we have the technology to transmit and share our thoughts around the world at the speed of light. The internet is not a bunch of computers connected to each other, but a bunch of human minds connected to each other. It is an incredible technology, but technology is not neutral. Right now, the biggest tech companies are making some of the most important connections in our society, connecting people with products and services, connecting advertisers to users, and connecting voters to candidates. The decisions that tech companies make can shape society for good or ill. Their decisions and algorithms determine what people see in their news feeds. They determine what people find when they go online to look for something. They determine what people believe, shaping their views of the world. We should use technological innovation to make government more transparent, accountable, and responsive, not to replace it with private mechanisms that do not answer to the public. So, there are many battles to be fought. Do we want social networks that are engineered to be addictive? Or do we want them to promote healthy patterns of online communication? Do we want networks that support privacy and security? Or do we want ones that spy on us and sell our personal information? There is no more time to waste in the fantasy of separation, in the myth of apocalypse, in the fairy tales of an afterlife. How can we find the time to act? We are the ones we've been waiting for. This is our time to act. There is no more time to waste. We need to create new forms of wealth. We need to build new relationships and transform our old relations of domination. We must heal our bodies, restore our communities, and challenge those who are damaging the planet and its inhabitants. We need to celebrate life in all its diversity and complexity. We need to build new communities, create local economies, and promote sustainable and ecologically friendly businesses. We need to tell different stories, stories of possibilities, stories of hope. We need to cultivate new ways of being so that we can be present in the world as it is. We need to find the time to act now more than ever.
So those were a few excerpts. I just love the idea of sneaking that message in cryptographically to a bunch of VC crypto bros that they paid for it. So that brings us up to 2021, and this was all, so everything I showed was before Midjourney, before DALL-E, before Stable Diffusion, before Lambda, Google's Lambda, which is the chatbots that that Google engineer thought was conscious and caused a big ruckus about it, before ChatGPT, before GPT-4, which was released just yesterday. In 2021, the technology was not very mature. As you can see from the aesthetics, there were no off-the-shelf tools to use. You had to know how to code, you had to be quite technical. It was a pain to get anything to work, let alone to do what you wanted it to do. So overall, these technologies were very inaccessible to most people. And then in 2022, that all changed. I can't believe it's been less than 8 months since DALL-E 2 was released, and Midjourney, and then Stable Diffusion, and then everything that's happened. And in context of everything that's happened within the last year, I think the title, Distributed Consciousness, has taken on a whole new meaning now, because we have the whole world both working with these tools, but also without wanting to, being part of the data set. So that when you produce something with Midjourney, for example, actually you're not the sole author, but literally the 5 billion images which were in the training set, and the authors of those are all co-authors. This is a much larger topic that I probably don't have time for, so I will just end there, kind of on a cliffhanger, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you for listening, and yeah.
Memo, thank you for that. I think I was correct last week when I said this might blow your mind. It was a fascinating talk. So I want to go back to, please, if you have questions, let us know, but I'll start us off. Rituals are algorithms for the mind and body.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about how we, the ritual of meditation, of kind of meditating with nature.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you view the role of technology AI perhaps is part of that, but more generally, the role of technology, how has it changed our sort of meditation, our ability to kind of meditate with nature? Has it obscured it? Has it brought clarity?
Well, that's a very big question. Sorry, there's many directions. There's many layers to it. That's a great question. There's so many layers. I'll start with the rituals algorithm for the body and mind. That came through because, as you can see, I've got asthma, and I've also got IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and there's just no medicine for it, right? Like no one's ever found any medicine for it. The only medicine I've found is, like, for example, doing yoga, fixes my stomach. And that's when I realized that I'm performing an algorithm to transform my mental state, to my mental and physical state, to a state that is not attainable via any other sequence of steps. Also, the fact that when I have IBS pain, it's basically muscle cramps. I'm like, why can't I control those muscles? Like, why can I control this muscle, but I can't control that muscle? Like, that's not fair. Like, I want those muscles to stop. And I don't have direct control over those muscles in the same way I have over these muscles. But the way I found to control those muscles is through this other weird algorithm. So that is where that comes from. But of course, it's much larger because as a society, we use rituals to bond. We use rituals for everything. We use rituals to get together, to make meaning. And with technology, what I find really fascinating, again, this is a really big topic. I'm really interested in religions and how religions have evolved. And by religion, I'm not just referring to Christianity or Islam. I'm referring to, Zeus and, Poseidon and Krishna, like every faith and religion that we've had, and how they have evolved over the years and how they live in symbiosis with their host societies. And now Silicon Valley has a religion. And I find how in these pockets of society where the old gods have been abandoned, new gods have come in place. With AI, it's mind-blowing how literal this translation is. I mean, you have people like Kurzweil promising life after death, like literally promising we will upload our mind into the cloud. Like, this is straight out of Christianity. This is not just Christianity, but straight out of the Abrahamic religions. So I find it fascinating how we are so programmed to have to find this kind of connection with whether it's technology or older technologies. Like, language is a technology at the end of the day. So I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, it's such a big topic. I'm trying to summarize a lot of thoughts, but I'm happy to dig deeper if.
So we're talking about ritual and algorithm, and what it made me think about is how in different cultures, the words, the language are almost the building blocks to create those. And we've all heard that people who grow up in cultures that live in snow have many more ways of understanding different types of snow than any of us can see. I'm wondering what you think the progress as AI moves forward and it starts developing languages that we cannot even conceive of internally, and will we even be able to connect?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, language is a fascinating thing. Wittgenstein famously thought if we solve language, we'll solve all of philosophy. And there's actually a language cognitive scientist here at UCSD, Lera Boroditsky, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, who I've been following for many, many years. And she does a lot of work in specifically that domain of how language and our understanding are so tightly coupled. So in context of your question on AI, I'm not a language person, but what I find so fascinating about language is that it's incredibly lossy, that ultimately we have this space of meaning and experience. And what we've done is we've cut that up, we've carved it up with words. And this has turned out to be a wonderful technology. And probably this is what really sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. It's not necessarily just our cognitive capacity, because if you look at an octopus, a 1-year-old octopus can solve problems that not only a 1-year-old child can't solve, but maybe a 5-year-old child may or may not be able to solve. But the octopus is able to do this without going through an education, whereas humans, what makes our civilization so powerful is that we go through education, and language is a really, really big part of that. By the time I'm 20 years old, I've studied all of the great thinkers of the past millennia. So language is super effective, but it's very, very lossy. What computers are able to do is they're able to communicate with each other without that loss. And this is a really big open question, because whether that's a good thing or not, when humans communicate, communication is lossy, it's faulty. In one way, that's what gives rise maybe the richness of human culture, particularly artists. Like, this is what artists do. Artists are communicators, but they're not trying to communicate in the most lossless way possible. They're trying to communicate in a very lossy way, but in a way such that when the message goes into the other person, it explodes in their mind and it unpacks based on who that person is. And the commonalities is what ties us together. And what machines are able to do is they're able to communicate completely losslessly. It's almost as if like Einstein implants his knowledge into me, and then Wittgenstein implants his knowledge into me, and then Donna Haraway implants her knowledge into me. Machines are able to do this. And so I don't think any living organism has been able to do this. So that's a really big question, like what's the impact of that going to be? The other interesting question that, based on your question, what made me think of is there's this big question whether a machine can make art. Whether when a machine makes it, is it art? Like, is the machine the artist? And I think it's safe to say that today, when Midjourney makes something, no one would consider the machine the artist. But there is a hypothetical question that at some point in the future, could there be a point where a machine produces something and we would call it art? And that's an interesting question, I think, because it makes us think of like, well, at what point would we consider the machine the artist? And for me, the only answer that I can come up with is at the point where I start caring about the internal state of the machine. But then the question is the question that you just asked. Would I even be able to recognize anything, because it's such an alien system, would I even be able to recognize or appreciate anything that the machine has to say? Arguably, the machine is already showing things that no human could have ever conceived. But that doesn't automatically make it valuable. So I don't really have an answer. I'm just kind of meandering around a theme that I think we're going to be asking a lot more of in the next few years.
Memo, so much has changed in the last 8 years since it took off. AI has taken off. What do you foresee 8 years down the road from now, or 80 years down, or 800 years from now? Project a little bit.
Well, 8 years, I think, is impossible, let alone 800 years. I will say this. I think the trajectory is showing general purpose learning algorithms. I hesitate to saying AGI, so artificial general intelligence, because AGI is such an amorphous term. It's on one hand what Kurzweil predicts, that we'll be able to upload our brains into the cloud. But I don't know if that's going to happen, to be honest. I don't know if we'll ever be able to download yourself onto the thing. But what will happen is we will have machines in the near future, I think within a few years, that are general purpose learning algorithms. So you can plug anything in, ask it to do pretty much anything, and it will be able to do it. That doesn't mean it's human-like, because human-like AI and general AI are very different things. But the ramifications of this, which is really important, the reason why AI is probably the most transformative technology, and I'm not just saying this to jump on the hype train, I don't like hypes, but because developments in AI ultimately will lead to developments in any field that is data-driven. And today, everything is data-driven. Physics, biology, chemistry, our economy, psychology, they're all data-driven fields. So any breakthroughs in AI will also have downstream effects on biology, chemistry, physics, etc. So, like for example, this isn't a speculation anymore. DeepMind's AlphaFold, right? AlphaFold 2, which is able to make insanely accurate predictions given a string of amino acids. How will that protein fold? And this, in turn, has been an unsolved problem since the 50s, has huge impacts on molecular biology. Expect more of that. Expect the unexpected. I do expect breakthroughs in medicine, in physics, and some of these breakthroughs may be undesirable, like boosting an IQ to 300. I expect that to be a reality, and the trajectory that we're on, I think, shows that it will be a very expensive service. So we'll end up with a breed of humans who have IQ of 300 who can afford it, unless regulation kind of kicks in. So yeah, a few speculations.
Sure.
There's a few questions online, and I'm going to be the proxy. Do you think there's an imminent technology merger of AI and human consciousness through some sort of Neuralink connection?
Okay, the Neuralink thing, I don't see that as imminent, to be honest. I'm not a neuroscientist, but conversations with my neuroscience friends, that is not, to my knowledge, that imminent. But then again, here's the wacky thing with AI. Breakthroughs in AI can lead to breakthroughs in that field. There's this funny debate between, we need to understand the brain first to be able to build good AI. But now we're at a stage where we actually might need to build AI to be able to understand the brain. That might be a reality.
Hi, you said that the kind of questions we ask change the way we see the world.
Say that again, sorry?
The kind of questions we ask change the way we see the world. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so that was based on that study that Alfred Yarbus did. That it's a very, very classic experiment. But so he asked people questions about this painting, and that affected how they scan the world. And the way I kind of extrapolated that to metaphorically weave into my project is that, in a sense, the meaning that we're looking for is going to affect the actions that we take. Because the act of sensing the world, even just sensing, even just seeing, requires action. You need to move your eyes to be able to see the world in the same way that a visually impaired person needs to move their hand along a surface to be able to build a model of what it looks like. Now, depending on their goal, they will move their hand in a different way, depending on the actions that they're going to take. So, and that, I think, also metaphorically ties into the way that we make meaning, not just from the perceptual point of view, but, for example, reading a text. You can give the same text to two people, and they can take opposite conclusions. They can say, yeah, this is evidence from my point of view. And the other person will say, no, this is evidence from my point of view. We see this all the time. And it also happens with the decisions that you take with, what articles to read, what authors to follow, what talks to go to. The actions we take are a result of the meanings that we want in the first place, but then in turn that reinforces the worldview that we construct.
Okay, I have three that I'm going to read quickly, and you could answer briefly or elaborate. Maybe these are very general because I'm an evolutionary biologist. My background is primatology, and this is very new to me. But so I'd love clarification. Could you please repeat and expound on what the exhibition voice said about love? Because I assume we all care about this. And then in what context did you realize the saying consciousness is evolution's solution to dealing with big data? I loved that. And then the other one is currently I hack myself by letting trainers at the gym tell me what to do to strengthen my body. And so who else should I follow? You read those books, the octopus books, which I took a picture of, to more easily hack my body even more.
Okay. Well, a lot of great questions. I don't remember what the AI said about about love, because I actually didn't write that. AI wrote it. But I mean, we did co-write it. I think, thinking back, so that particular bit, that was a poem. So the way I structured the whole, the manifesto, it starts off very esoterical, talks about love and life and death and free will. And there's a poem, which is where I think it was speaking about love. And then it kind of morphs into perception, and then it gets very kind of hard-hitting towards the end about everything that you heard. So I don't remember what it said about love, to be perfectly honest, so that's, quite disappointing. But I will say I am a big fan of, I hope I don't get it the wrong way around, Lisa Barrett Feldman, or Lisa Feldman Barrett. I always mix her surname. She's a cognitive scientist who studies emotions. So she has a lot to say about emotions. She's written a couple of books about emotions, which I really love. She talks a lot about emotions. So I would suggest those books. The gist of her position, if I hope I'm not summarizing it incorrectly, is that affect in general, emotions and affect, are a way the body communicates with our conscious awareness what's happening in the body. So instead of, we're not consciously aware of every single cell, of everything that's happening, rather the body notifies the mind of what's happening through emotions. So that's my interpretation of it. I suggest you can find her talks on YouTube or check out her books. Regarding the evolution, how did I come up with that? I don't know. I'm really into evolutionary biology. I read a lot of Dawkins back in the day. Also a lot of Daniel Dennett, which is more on the kind of cultural, philosophical, memetic side. But yeah, because that was 2014, so that was 8 years ago. I guess I was really into thinking about consciousness. So that's why I was reading a lot of Richard Dawkins. That's my interest in molecular biology. But then Daniel Dennett writes a lot about consciousness, John Searle, Andrew Chalmers, Andy Clark. So I was thinking a lot about consciousness, and I guess that's the idea that I had. And when Peter Godfrey Smith wrote the book in 2016, basically that's the thesis of the book, that he spends the whole book. So I wrote a blog post about this. I don't think he saw my blog post, but he wrote a whole book really unpacking this theory, and I love the book for that reason, because he gives tons of examples of how that is a very plausible hypothesis. And just very quickly, to hack yourself, Andrew Huberman at Stanford. I don't follow him anymore because I've just listened to way too much of him. But I did like a big drive from San Diego to San Francisco, and I just listened to 5 episodes back to back, and I can't listen to his voice ever again. But he's perfect for hacking. Like I got a lot from him. So particularly on the health side, he has a lot of guest people that also will help you discover new people. So he's a good starting point, I would say.
Thank you for your talk. This is not my area either, so my mind is kind of blown, as Stephen said. You didn't really talk about AI and empathy, and I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on that, because I know that AI can be used to read emotions through, capturing facial expressions, but will it ever be able to actually read or, be able to understand empathy? And if it can't, are there limitations? Like, is that a limitation of AI, that it'll never get to the point where it becomes like human because it won't ever be able to?
This is a really good question. It's a really critical question because there's two answers to this question. One is from the science side and one is from the business side, and they don't agree. For example, Lisa Barrett Feldman, or Lisa Feldman Barrett, apologies, I need to anchor that into my brain. Which one, sorry? Feldman Barrett, okay, Lisa Feldman Barrett. She often talks about how it's impossible to read emotions from a face. She will say, humans don't read emotions from just the face, they read it from everything. Face is one of the cues, but every single time, if the context outweighs the face, the reality is in the context, not the face. And in her talks, she will demonstrate this by showing a cropped face and say, what is this person feeling? And everyone will say, yeah, this person is disgusted. And then it'll zoom out, and you'll say, oh, no, she's super excited. She's not disgusted. Like, you can't read it from this boundary. So on the one hand, you have scientists who know this, but on the other hand, you have companies like Microsoft who are pumping out products who are saying this can read emotion, but it's reading it just from here. So what we have is we have AI, which is learning to read emotion, but based on insufficient information. And if it's based on insufficient information, it's going to give incorrect results. And this is worse than not having automated emotion reading, because we have automated emotion reading, which is incorrect. So on the other hand, I don't know if it's an unsolvable problem. Like, it's plausible that in the future, machines may be able to read and empathize better than a human. And in that film, Ex Machina, Alex Garland's film, this was portrayed. I mean, that film is worth, gets criticism for many good reasons, but a few things it did get right, I think, is those subtleties. Like, that machine was able to read the person, that you can't lie, for example. Like, this is one thing I expect. When you were talking about, Stephen, about what do we expect in the future, I expect that it might be plausible in the future we won't be able to lie. Like, that's, I think, like, for just quite a few years ago, there was already the technology to, like, this is crazy, reflect Wi-Fi, using Wi-Fi, and how your heart perturbs Wi-Fi signals, reading those perturbations to get real-time heart rate fluctuations. For example, like, this technology exists. So I think it's plausible that in the future we will have an app that can tell if you're lying or not. So this will transform society so drastically, we can't even imagine. But I just want to sum up. There's two avenues, I think. One is it will be able to do it, and it will do it really well. What will that society look like? I can't even imagine. The other avenue is it will try to do it. Companies will say it's working, but it won't, and it will be wrong. And then that's a whole other scenario that I can't even imagine the downstream effects of. Yeah, but it's a very, very critical question.
Jordan Crandall online asks, it's helpful to be reminded of the role of technology in shaping perception and self-awareness throughout history. In your work, are you looking at how technology is constructing a new sense of self, or rather a form of awareness beyond self?
So the role of technology in how we, like, I love thinking about how technology has always been such an integral part of humanity, and like, it is a part of us. Like, language is a technology. And one of the things that happens is how it transforms the way we operate on a level that's so fundamental we might not even be aware of it. Like, we started offloading our memory to devices many, many thousands of years ago, right? In the form of tablets, etc. We started offloading certain and then eventually to things like this. We started offloading aspects of our thinking to our devices as well. And now, just actually tying it back to AI and where AI is now, we started offloading our thinking to devices with computers, and we can see the effects where no one remembers a phone number anymore because we don't have to remember phone numbers. So that part of our mind, I guess, gets lazy, but then we can do other things. But what's interesting, and what I think about a lot, is with the effects of what's happening with things like Midjourney, DALL-E, all these creative tools that we have, what they are automating is imagination. In all the works that I showed, I use AI, but I still imagined everything. And that's kind of typically how artists would work. They might imagine something, or it's very iterative. You might have a loose idea of something, and then you start working, and then you see something, and it feeds back, and then your idea develops, and there's this back and forth. But now with things like, I mean, I was going to show, but like, so these are some of the images that I've been creating with DALL-E. I didn't imagine any of these. I just said a tentacly glass monster, and it just generated these images. And so I'm thinking a lot about what are the downstream effects of this, like offloading imagination, and I can't help but think, I'm trying to be not too dystopian here, but on one hand, we have people like Huberman, we have people who are body hacking, we have so much knowledge on health and so much science and technology around health and body that today we have probably the strongest people who have ever lived, the fastest people who have ever lived, the highest jumpers. Like, we have people who are the absolute pinnacle of human fitness, but they're a minority. On the other hand, obesity is one of the leading causes of death. So I'm wondering whether these tools will lead to a kind of breed of superhuman creatives who are able to work with these technologies to boost their creativity and imaginative capacities. Because to me, this is augmenting my imagination. I didn't imagine any of these, but with the feedback loop, it's making me superhuman creative. But I do wonder if there will be imagination will be lazied out, so to speak. I don't know if that was a bit of a digression, but yeah.
Oh, that was incredible. Thank you so much. And that's the end of the talk.
Well, I just want to say I'm so happy that we made the conscious choice to invite you here, so that and all of you made the choice to make it here, so we could experience this, and so you can explode in our minds, and so thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming.